And they would then be ratified by the states and become a part of the Constitution. But there was a problem. He had to become a member of the first Congress. And there was a young man opposing him and opposing the Constitution itself. And his name was Colonel Monroe. And Colonel Monroe was running to destroy the Constitution because he was a member of the Anti-Federalist Party. Now, it did not mean he was not a good American, but he did not believe such a document should exist in its form. So he was running against Mr. Madison. And there the Reverend Leland comes in. The Reverend Leland indicated that he would, I believe the term was deliver the solicitation of votes for Mr. Madison. And in that first election, Mr. Madison beat Colonel Monroe by 36 votes, became a member of the first Congress, and wrote the Bill of Rights, which was then submitted, and now you know the story. Except the end of the story involves a gift, because the Reverend Leland and I came to know each other because Mr. Madison and I are best friends, and I was introduced to Reverend Leland. He went to Connecticut, and because of my service in the position of presidency, he sent to me, and I am not exaggerating, a wagon from that doorway to this bench, and it was covered with the biggest wheel of cheese I have ever seen in my entire life. That's a lot of cheese. And the entire federal city, everyone came out when it came into town, and I had a large soiree, and there was hardened cider, and there was all manner of libation, and everyone cut off pieces of cheese, and it still took up so much room in the wagon we had to store it.
Oh my gosh, is that a lot of cheese? You got to feed the whole town with it.
So now you understand some origins.
Yes.
So when the master, Reverend Morey, did in fact let us out of the school for a break, all of the boys would go and mount their ponies. And then we would have what were called quarter races. And quarter races would be, you would pick a tree, and then you would ride 1/8 of a mile to the next tree, you would circle the tree and come back and touch the original tree. And that was a quarter race. And I was the fastest quarter racer among all the boys. And every day we would go out and I would beat them again, and I loved being the fastest. And one day a new boy came into the school. Now I was not only a good rider, I was an excellent judge of horseflesh. And that little pony he had was quicker than my own, and I could tell. And I was worried because I was going to lose my place as the fastest rider. And one day, as the new boy gained in boldness, he challenged me. He said, "I challenge you to a race, Mr. Jefferson." Now what was I to do? I couldn't refuse the challenge. I would have lost face among all of the boys. A good Pennsylvania rifle cost in excess of 4 pounds. Now what were we as 12-year-old boys going to do to acquire 4 pounds? So we did what every young man would do. We asked our fathers. And you know what the response was from our fathers? I don't know if your father would give you the same answer, but I assure you my father said, "It is not my responsibility to come up with 4 pounds for your acquisition of such an implement. If you wish to have it, you go get the money." Does father recognize that kind of response at all? Ah, I understand. And as it turned out, along the little village of Scottsville, they had some gentlemen who thought there were some valuables in this collection. And they noticed this tremendous trunk of papers, and they rooted through them all, throwing them hither and yon into the James River, and destroyed almost my entire collection of Indian linguistics. And that was a great loss to me, and ultimately, I believe, to others as these languages extinguished themselves. So that was a very sad occasion. I've heard that they have found some of the empty, or some of the sheaves of paper have been found down in Lynchburg, strewn about on various sandbars. So I was somewhat angry, shall we say.
And do you still feel that John Adams is obnoxious?
Obnoxious and disliked.
Let me comment on that, sir. One of the difficulties with the public media is they grasp upon some theme or some small fact and they expand upon it to shall we say, merchandise their own product. There was some substance, there was no doubt, there was some disagreement between ourselves politically, and it did wash over into our friendship, sadly. But recently, Dr. Rush of Pennsylvania has told the both of us, somewhat scoldingly, and it was appropriately, said, we are among the last of the signers. As you know, it took place 36 years ago. And for the two gentlemen who are somewhat instrumental in this document that was pregnant with our fates, we would be foolish and overly proud and sinful if we did not communicate with one another. So we have reestablished our correspondence, but I can tell you that Dr. Franklin's observation, and I assure you Mr. Adams has heard it, is accurate in that he is one of the most intelligent men in our country. He is disinterested, meaning he only has the love of country as his motivation. But occasionally he can get crazy.
I am most proud of writing the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. That was not an act of the presidency. That was when I was a member of the new Virginia Convention. But that was something that was required for, I believe, releasing the opinions of men, saying that they are not subject to the authority of governments. And once that was in place, I knew all else would begin to take place.
Our first capital was in New York, but new President Washington, wanted to let the people in the South know, because he had had contact with many of the middle colonies from his experiences. He had had contact with Massachusetts and Connecticut from the war years. But the people in the South, while they had heard of him, none of them had seen him. So he determined in the early stages, before they moved the capital to Philadelphia, or as they were moving it, he would move south, and then he would go on past Philadelphia, go into North Carolina, and on into South Carolina, just to show the people that he was in fact alive. It was not just a myth. So he went down, and the word spread to North Carolina. Was actually he did not get as far as your village of Charlotte, the hornet's nest, as Lord Dunmore called it. But he did go to Guilford Courthouse. Are you familiar with Guilford Courthouse? A small village, and they had some deadly battles there. But in any case, there was this young girl. I do not know what her name was, but there was this young girl, and how old are you? 10. I think she was about 12. And she had heard stories of President Washington, General Washington, all growing up, and the stories about his strength and his horsemanship and his leadership during the war, and she adored this story of General Washington. And when she heard that he was coming to Guilford Courthouse, she was so excited. But her family said, we are going to see the president, but we have to have someone here to take care of the chickens and the pigs, and you have to stay here. Oh, she was distraught. But as every young person would do when their parent asks, as you know, they comply, no doubt. And although she was very upset, she had to stay and take care of the chickens and the pigs. And she was just distraught at this lost opportunity she had to meet her hero. One day, there was a knock upon her door, and a man came, and he said, my gentleman, that he was the servant of a man, and he said, my gentleman needs some water. Could we take advantage? And perhaps maybe a victual or two. And she said, certainly, I don't have much, but I will give you anything that I have. And out of the carriage stepped President Washington. He came into her home. He sat down with her. He had drink and food at her hand. He told her stories, and she was absolutely enthralled, and she had more to tell her family than any of them could imagine. So keep that in mind. If you are ambitious and want something, it may happen. So there are a number of you who were not around to go through the passions of that particular era. You are here enjoying the benefits and blessings of our struggle with Great Britain, but as to exactly what took place in those days was something of a mystery to you, I would imagine. And I can tell you that you would not be alone, because even in those days, those many years ago, there were many British Americans who were absolutely questioning the motives of the Second Continental Congress and even its sanity for adopting such an instrument. The common phrase was, "We enjoy more de facto liberties than does a Yorkshireman, merely because the separation of the ocean between Great Britain and ourselves. Why should we even attempt to separate ourselves from the greatest of the European powers, even if we could do so? They protect us from the presumptions of France and Spain and popery. We owe allegiance to the king and we pay him his tribute, and that fulfills our loyalty. Why on earth would we want to do such a thing as to separate from our mother country?" That attitude was felt by many to be the most prudent and the most affordable of the available options to us at the time. But those of you who have obviously taken upon yourselves a great difficulty in traveling into the Spanish territories, as your family has, going as far as the banks of the Missouri, you know that your forefathers were not accustomed to deference to another. That was not a characteristic that enabled our forefathers, even in those early days in the 17th century, to survive on the barren coasts or the swampy lowlands or the rugged upland countries. They left their homes in Europe, they acquired land and secured societies through blood and treasure of their own, and they established laws that they felt would provide for their security and their common interest. Why? This argument went on in taverns similar to Mr. Swan's tavern here all of the time. And as the years grew more intense, I assure you the arguments grew more heated, particularly with the injection of ardent spirits. Now, how did we become and move from English colonists to British Americans to finally to be Americans?